The blood on her dress was not hers. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall and breathed, once, deliberate, controlled, while the sounds of the engagement celebration carried through the corridor like something she had no right to hear. Violins. Crystal. Laughter that belonged to a world she had quietly left 5 years ago. She had not come back for him. She reminded herself of that now, standing in the shadowed hallway of Blood Moon Palace. Her jaw tight, the smell of pine resin and burning candelabra wax thick in the air, she thought only of what had brought her here. Not nostalgia, not longing. Something far more urgent, far more dangerous, and entirely her own. She should not have come inside. She knew that the moment she crossed the threshold, the guards had not recognized her. She had made certain of that, but the palace remembered her in a way that no disguise could change. The particular weight of its silence. The way the chandeliers cast gold across marble floors in long, trembling lines. Some places hold the shape of old grief the way stone holds cold. She moved deeper into the corridor. Somewhere behind those gilded doors, the Alpha King was being celebrated. Moving forward, moving on. Good, she thought, and did not entirely believe it. Her name was Selene. Not the name she used now, that was Mara, clean and unremarkable, a name that asked no questions and invited none, but the name she had been given at birth, the name written. In the old Blood Moon registry in faded iron gall ink, Selene Ashvane, former ward of the Silver Valley Pack, former confidant to the palace's inner circle, former something she no longer allowed herself to name. She had been 22 when she left. She was 27 now. 5 years was long. Enough to learn how to breathe differently, to walk without recognition, to answer to a name that fit like a coat 2 sizes too large. She was observant by nature and careful by necessity. In the years since she had gone, she had become someone who noticed exits before. Entrances, who catalogued faces in rooms before meeting them, who could read a guard's boredom in the angle of his shoulders and a courtier's envy in the way she smoothed her gown. These were not skills she had been taught. They were skills she had grown the way. Certain plants grow toward light, away from danger, in the direction of survival. She rounded the east corridor and found what she had come for, the palace physician's private study, dark now and unattended. She moved inside, closed the door without sound, and set her leather satchel on the table with the careful efficiency of someone who had planned this moment repeatedly. The documents were here. She had known they would be old records from the Royal Physician's Registry, records that named a woman who no longer existed and a pregnancy. That had never been officially recorded. Her hands moved through the filing cabinet methodically. She was not nervous. Nervousness was a luxury she had learned to defer. She found the file. She was folding it into her satchel when the door behind her opened. She did not turn immediately. She noted the quality of the silence first, not the idle silence of a servant entering a dark room, but a weighted silence, deliberate, the kind that precedes something. Then she heard his voice. "Put it down." She had forgotten how it sounded. Low and unhurried, carrying the specific gravity of a man who had never once needed to raise it. A voice that didn't request, it simply made clear. She finished folding the document. Then she turned. He stood in the doorway wearing formal black, the silver seal of Blood Moon at his collar catching the faint light. 5 years had sharpened him, the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. His eyes, the color of deep water under cloud cover, with a texture like something waiting at the bottom of a still lake, moved across her face with the particular stillness of a man reorganizing everything he thought he knew. The silence lasted 3 seconds. She counted. "Hello, Selim," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not shock, he had been trained past shock before his 15th year. It was subtler than that. A brief stilling like a held breath before the careful composure returned. Selene. Her name in his mouth after 5 years was a peculiar thing. She noted the way it affected her, the way she noted all inconvenient things, observed, catalogued, set aside. "You're at your engagement celebration," she said. "You should return to it. You're in my physician's private study." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Stealing, reclaiming. She kept her voice even. These records belong to me. Everything inside this palace belongs to Blood Moon. He moved toward the table, not toward her, but angling slightly, the way a man moves when he is taking stock of a room. That's always been true. Is that why I'm here without an invitation? Because this palace still has a claim on me. He stopped. A pause, precise, controlled, before he answered. Why are you here? I told you. You told me nothing. You took something from my physician's files and implied it was yours. His gaze dropped to the satchel, then returned to her face. What pregnancy record, Selene? The room was very quiet. She had rehearsed this moment. Hundreds of small rehearsals in the kitchen of a house in the Northern Valley, while two small dark-haired children slept in the room beside hers. Rehearsals that had all ended the same way, with her deciding that this moment would never come, that he would never need to know, that the documents would be destroyed and the record erased and the last thread cut clean. She had not rehearsed for the particular way he was looking at her now, not with anger, with something more careful than anger. The kind of attention a man gives a problem he already suspects the shape of and has not yet allowed himself to name. It was a clerical record, she said. Nothing more. You crossed 3 pack borders in secret, attended my engagement celebration uninvited, broke into a locked study and risked exposure for a clerical record. He let the silence do the work. She had always hated that about him. His patience. You're going to be late returning, she said. Selene. Just her name, that was all. But the quality of it, the way he said it without demand or anger, with something quieter and more difficult, made her jaw tighten. I have to go, she said. She moved toward the door. He did not stop her with his hands. He stopped her with a single sentence, spoken to the back of her head, unhurried, the way a man speaks when he already knows the answer and is simply waiting for the other person to stop pretending. How old are they? She went still. The candle on the physician's desk burned low between them. She could smell the warm wax and the cold pine coming in through the cracked window and underneath both, the faint cedar and iron scent that had always been his and that 5 years had not made her forget. She did not turn around. 4, she said, and left. Myra found her at the east gate. Myra was the only person in the Northern Valley who knew both names, Selene and Mara, and had the particular quality of loyalty that asks no permission and offers no judgment. She was a small woman with steady hands and an accountant's eye for risk, and she had been standing at the east gate for 40 minutes in the cold with 2 children asleep against her sides, and an expression that said she had been counting the minutes since Selene went. Inside, you were seen, Myra said, not loudly. I know. By him? Selene adjusted the strap of her satchel. Kale and Lyra stirred slightly, 4 years old, dark-haired, with their father's particular jaw and their mother's careful eyes, and settled again without waking. Selene pressed her hand briefly to Lyra's hair. Something in her chest pulled tight and she let it. We need to move the timeline, Selene said. The documents, I have them. Myra studied her face. Did he recognize you? Yes. A pause. Then, practically, how much time do we have? Less than we planned. They were 3 steps from the gate when the torches along the wall flared, not naturally, not from wind, but in the deliberate sequence that meant the palace was going into closed border protocol. Every exit. Every road out of the capital district sealed by royal seal within the hour. Selene stopped walking. She looked up at the torches, then at Myra, then at the sleeping weight of her children. Pressed against a woman who had given up 3 years of her own life to help carry a secret that was never hers to carry. He closed the border, Myra said quietly. Yes, for you. It was not a question. Selene did not answer it as one. What she felt was not what she had expected to feel. She had expected anger, clean, manageable, a familiar companion. Instead, she felt something more complicated, something with weight to it, the particular kind of fear that comes not from danger but from the moment. Before a thing becomes irrevocable. He had closed the borders of his entire capital district on the night of his engagement celebration, under his own seal and his own authority, without explanation or justification to anyone. That was not the action of a man pursuing a thief. She understood what it was. She did not let herself name it. "We go back inside," she said. Myra looked at her. "Selene, we go back inside, and we find somewhere safe for tonight, and we do not let the children near the main halls." She kept her voice level. "He won't move against us. Not tonight." "How do you know that?" She looked at the torches again, at the gold light they threw across the stone walls of a palace she had once known by memory. "Because if he wanted to move against me," she said, "he wouldn't have warned me first." He found her in the East Library at the second hour past midnight. She was not hiding. She had made a small fire in the library's stone grate and sat beside it in one of the old reading chairs with a cup of something lukewarm and a posture that suggested she had been expecting him. The children were asleep in the adjoining antechamber, behind a closed door, with Myra sitting outside it. Selim entered without ceremony. He had removed his formal jacket. His sleeves were turned back at the cuffs. He looked in the low firelight like someone who had not slept in some time and had stopped performing otherwise. He sat in the chair across from her. Neither spoke for a long moment. "They have your jaw," she said finally. Not softly, just plainly. He looked at the fire. Something in his face was different from the corridor. The careful governance of it had eased slightly, the way a man's expression eases when he is too tired to hold a particular shape. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "It was not quite a question. You were with Vesa. That was over before you left. I didn't know that." He looked at her then. "You could have asked. You were the Alpha King." She held the cup in both hands. "You don't ask the Alpha King. You make decisions and you live with them." A pause. "I made mine. You made mine for me." She didn't answer that. The fire burned lower. Somewhere outside the library, the palace was still moving, guards completing their border protocols, courtiers retiring from the celebration, a world managing itself without either of them. He was quiet for a long time. In the firelight, he looked younger. Not young, Selim had. Not looked young since his father died and left him a crown and a war, but younger than he had in the corridor, than he had on the border seal orders, than he had in the 5 years of his name in the news dispatches she had read from the Northern Valley with her morning tea and her careful, composed grief. "Are they," he stopped, started differently. "Are they well?" Something in her eased very slightly. "Yes, Kale." He said it the way someone says a name they've held in their mouth for some time. "And Lyra, you were listening at the gate." "I was listening at the gate." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire made a small sound. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll have rooms prepared." The emotional window closed. She let it. By morning, the man who had closed the borders had sent a different message entirely. Lord Draven Vash, the head of the Eastern Coalition and the primary investor in the upcoming royal marriage, arrived at the palace before dawn with 4 armed escorts and a written demand that the woman found inside palace grounds during the engagement celebration be handed to coalition custody for questioning regarding stolen documents and espionage. Selene heard this from Myra, who had heard it from a palace maid, who had heard it from the guard rotation. She stood in the center of the East Library and felt the specific quality of danger that comes not from a single threat but from the architecture of a trap, from realizing that the walls around you were placed before you arrived. Vash knew who she was. More than that, Vash had known she was coming. Someone had told him. Someone who knew that Selene Ashvane was still alive, that she had children, that those children were the Alpha King's heirs, and that this information, delivered at the right moment to the right man, could destabilize a royal engagement and a political alliance in a single night. She was not the target. She was the instrument. The library door opened. Selim entered. Behind him, his head guard Rain, a broad-shouldered man with a skeptic's face and 17 years of unbroken loyalty, closed the door and stood against it. "Vash is demanding custody," Selene said. "I know. He knows about the children. I know. He's going to use them." "I know, Selene. Not sharp, just certain. I've already refused the demand." She stared at him. "You refused a coalition demand on the night of your engagement to a coalition ally." "Yes. Selim, the engagement is suspended." He said it the way he said most things, unhurried, with the particular weight of a decision already made. As of an hour ago, the room was very quiet. Rain, against the door, had the expression of a man who has witnessed something historic and is managing his reaction with professional effort. You can't, she stopped. Your alliance, your border agreements, everything you've spent 3 years building is not more important than this. His eyes on her were steady. Don't argue with me about what I can and cannot do. Not about this? Then what exactly are you doing? He crossed to the library table and set down a document bearing his seal, not the formal royal seal of public decree, but the older one, the personal seal of Blood Moon's ruling line. Used only for matters of the line itself. I'm acknowledging them, he said. Formally, under Blood Moon law before any coalition court can touch them. She looked at the document, then at him. Something moved in her chest, not warmth. Exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had been very still for 5 years and was now, against her better judgment, shifting. They'll come after you, she said. They'll try. Seal 'em. Selene. The same quality as last night, her name, just her name, doing work that whole sentences couldn't. Let me do this. She looked at the seal, at the room, at the man standing in it whose jaw her daughter had inherited and whose patience her son had somehow also acquired at 4 years old, which had always made her smile when she was alone. She picked up the pen. The document was filed by midday. Vash withdrew his demand by nightfall, after a private meeting with Selim that rain later. Described to Myra as short, quiet, and final. The exact contents were not recorded. The outcome was, the children came out of the antechamber at mid-afternoon, led by Myra and loud with the particular energy of 4-year-olds who had been asked to be quiet for too long. Kale immediately found the library's collection of carved wooden wolves on the mantelpiece and began rearranging them with focused authority. Lyra walked directly to the center of the room, looked at Selim with her mother's careful eyes, and said, "Are you the king?" "Yes," he said. She considered this. Mama said kings are complicated. Something moved in his expression. He looked at Selene over the child's head. Selene looked back. "She's right," he said. 3 months later, in a small courtyard off the east wing that neither of them had planned to use as a regular meeting place, and both of them used almost every evening now, Selim asked her the question that had been circling since the night of the engagement celebration. "Why did you come back?" The courtyard held the last of the autumn light. A brazier burned between them. Selene had a blanket across her lap, and the particular unhurried posture of someone who has stopped preparing an answer and is simply choosing to tell the truth. "The records," she said. "If Vash's people found them before I did." "That's why you came for the documents." He watched her. "I asked why you came back." She was quiet for a moment. The brazier popped softly. Somewhere inside, she could hear Kale insisting on something and Myra redirecting him with the patient efficiency she had perfected over years. "I told myself it was only for the records," she said. "I told myself that for the entire 3-day journey, every hour of it." She looked at him. "I was very convincing." Something changed in his face, not a smile exactly, something quieter and more durable. "You could have sent someone," he said. "I could have. You didn't." "No." The best line she had was not something she had planned to say. It arrived the way true things arrive without announcement and already whole. "Some things," she said quietly, "you have to come back to yourself." He did not answer immediately. He looked at her in the last of the autumn light with the expression of a man who has spent 5 years moving forward and has just, in this moment, understood that moving forward and moving on are not the same thing. He reached across and set his hand over hers. Not urgent, not demanding, just deliberate. The way he did most things, she did not pull away. The formal acknowledgement of Kale and Lyra as heirs of Blood Moon was recorded in the royal registry on the first day of winter, in the same iron gall ink that had once recorded their mother's name. The coalition rebuilt its relationship with Blood Moon over the following year, through different terms and a different representative, Vash having chosen, after his conversation with Selim, to retire from diplomatic service entirely. Rain never once said, "I told you so," which Myra told him privately was his best quality and possibly his only one. He accepted this as the compliment it was. The courtyard with the brazier became, without announcement or ceremony, the place they returned to at the end of difficult days. Cale eventually claimed it for his own purposes, specifically for the staging of elaborate wooden wolf campaigns on the stone bench, and they let him, and found other courtyards, and returned to this one anyway. One evening in early spring, Selim came into the East Library and found Selene at the table, with a cup of tea and the posture of someone who had been sitting quietly for some time and did not mind it. The children were asleep. The palace was settled. Outside the narrow windows, the first night of warm air after a long winter moved through the courtyard like something exhaling. He sat across from her. She looked up. "You're not complicated," she said. He considered this. "No, you're just slow." A pause not unkind. "Some of us had to make faster decisions." He looked at her with the deep-water eyes and the specific quality of attention she had never been able to fully defend against. "I'm caught up now," he said. She looked back at him. The fire burned low and warm between them. "Some things, you have to come back to yourself."